Number 1. Lori Nesson. Any detective will tell you that sometimes all it takes is one piece of information to solve a case. Reynoldsburg police got that tip on a cold case after 4 to 6 long years. On September 28, 1974, Lori Nesson appeared. She had attended a high school football game and subsequently a house party, according to the police. Nesson was last seen walking home just after midnight. Nesson's naked body was discovered in a ditch on Rose Hill Road, but her garments were strewn across several miles. Due to the limited technology available at the time, the case became cold. At the request of Nesson's family, the Reynoldsburg Division of Police reopened the investigation in August 2019. Officer Craig Bradford took on the case because his daughter was 15 at the time, the same age as Nesson. Officer Bradford claims that the more he looked at the files, the more he discovered contradictions. Pictures that, at the autopsy, showed some cuts on her lip, things that would indicate foul play. The time of death on Nesson's Odyssey also didn't match up with when the teen was last seen. Bradford presented his findings to the Eckling County coroner in 2020, who agreed to investigate the case. A few months later, the coroner's office amended the cause of death to undetermined homicidal violence. Then in December, a local news channel broadcasted an update on the nascent situation. After the program aired, someone contacted him with information that night. The caller was Karen Adams's cousin, and she said the news article of Lori's death was quite similar to her cousin's homicide. A similar case had happened 6 months after Nesson's death on March 9, 1975. Adams, then 17, was walking from her Whitehall home to a friend's house when she disappeared. The next day, her body was discovered in a ditch on Vangert Road near Blacklick. The similarities were too strong to ignore. The authorities contacted the Franklin County investigator who was in charge of the Adams case, which had been solved in 2011. The Franklin County Sheriff's Office Detective Chuck Clark told him that they believed the 2 guys who killed Adams also killed Nesson. I've always suspected these 2 individuals were involved in something bigger than what they were caught for, Clark added. They drank, drove around the city, went anywhere they pleased, and approached girls and young ladies who were alone. Robert Meyer was 70 years old when DNA evidence tied Tim and Charles Weber to Adams' murder in 2011. He was apprehended by authorities in Cincinnati. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in jail, but he died in prison just a few years later. Weber, on the other hand, was already deceased and cremated, but his son submitted a cheek swab that revealed his DNA, proving his involvement in Adams' murder. Meyer and Weber were identified as the men responsible for Nesson's death by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations. Nesson's family is understandably troubled by the fact that her sister's final moments were probably spent in terror at the hands of 2 men they will never meet. According to investigators, Meyer and Weber both had a criminal background that put them in the old Ohio penitentiary in the 1960s. Meyer was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 1963 for murdering a man with a hammer. Weber was jailed for robbery. Following their release, the 2 moved in together and lived in Whitehall in 1974. Both men were convicted 3 years later of rape and kidnapping at least 2 women in the Toledo region. According to the investigator, one thing is certain. They were serial murderers and rapists. They would lure victims inside the car, joyride with them, and then sexually assault and kill them. Of course, knowing what they did to Lori and Karen, and knowing that there were about 6 months between that and then their activity in Toledo a year later, they would have had plenty of opportunities to victimize other young girls. The police are actively seeking information regarding similar cases in that period. Nesson's family expressed hope that her cold case will provide hope to other families. I sincerely hope that this opens a door for other families who are waiting for answers, said her sister. No one should have to wait 4 to 6 years for anything. Number 2. The case of Junko Furuta is different. This is one of the few cases that will shake you to your bones and make you boil with rage from start to end. It's not fascinating. It's just horrible. The only mystery here is how human beings can be so unimaginably cruel and how a judicial system can fail an innocent girl so badly after everything she went through. Before we dive right into the case, please note that the content of this video may trigger people on the topics of rape, torture, and murder. Let's get right into it then. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old high school student living in Saitama Prefecture in Japan in 1988. She was smart, ambitious, and generally well-liked by everybody around her. Her grades were great. She stayed away from alcohol and drugs, and she was working at a plastic molding factory in her free time to save up for a trip she planned on taking after graduation. She had also accepted the job that she planned to take on after she graduated. Needless to say, she had a bright future ahead. Unfortunately for her, she went to school with some juvenile delinquents who were also ranking Yakuza members: Hiroshi Miyano, Jihugiro, Shinji Minuto, and Yasushi Watanabe. Miyano had a history of committing crimes and apparently had been getting into trouble since elementary school. Reportedly, Miyano had a crush on her and had even confessed his feelings to her before. But she rejected him because she wanted to focus on her studies. Miyano's horrible reputation and his connections to the Yakuza scared most people quite a lot, but Furuta had the courage to outrightly tell him no. On November 25, 1988, Miyano and Minuto were wandering around to find a victim to kidnap and rape. It just so happened that Furuta was riding back home around 8:30 p.m. after her shift at her job. Under Miyano's orders, Minuto kicked Furuta off her bike and ran away from the scene. Miyano then approached her and pretended to help her out to try and get her to trust him. Unfortunately, she did. Miyano led Furuta to an old warehouse and immediately began threatening to kill her if she did not listen to him. She tried to fight back, but he managed to overpower her, after which he raped her and then led her to a hotel close by where he raped her again. When he called up his friends to brag about exploiting her, the group reportedly asked him to keep her there to allow multiple people to take advantage of her. Miyano eventually took her to a park where his friends were waiting, after which they went through her bag and found her address written in her notebooks. To force her to cooperate, they threatened to kill her family if she tried to escape. They finally took her to Minuto's house, which would be her prison for the next 44 days. On November 27th, Furuta's parents contacted the police to report her disappearance. This made her captors force her to call her parents and tell them that she had run away and was otherwise fine. They believed her and dropped the case. The boys also forced her to act like Minuto's girlfriend when his parents were around, but quickly dropped the pretense when they realized that his parents would not report him to the police. The boys brutally tortured her over the next month. The brutality of the tortures escalated over time and initially began with humiliating her sexually before inflicting physical pain. While they also gave her limited food and water initially, they eventually stopped that and gave her a diet of cockroaches and milk instead. Their later statements revealed that their tortures included, but were not limited to, making her stand outside naked during the winter, force-feeding her large amounts of alcohol, making her smoke multiple cigarettes at once, urinating on her, beating her, penetrating her with various objects, and burning her with lighter fluid. They even stated that at one point, they penetrated her with a hot light bulb that exploded inside her. Take a moment to let that sink in. Animals treat other animals better. These boys turned into complete monsters while Furuta continued to do her best to defy them and fight back. Not before long, however, the severity of the attacks and her near-to-nothing diet began to take a toll on her body. She became crippled and could not move at all. Her face became swollen, she was severely malnourished, and her body was so injured that it became unable to urinate. As a result, her flesh began to rot while she was still alive. Her condition made her captors lose all sexual interest in her, and they found another 19-year-old woman to gang rape, who, like Furuta, was also on her way home from work. On January 4th, 1989, a final brutal attack on her would end her life. Miyano had lost a game of mahjong the night before and decided to vent his anger out on Furuta. For over 2 hours, her captors tortured her and beat her repeatedly. They poured lighter fluid on her and set her on fire multiple times, which she apparently tried to put out before she became unresponsive. They dropped dumbbells on her stomach, forced her to drink her own urine, placed short candles on her eyelids, and dropped hot wax all over her body. At some point, they covered their hands with plastic bags to continue beating her. She eventually went into a state of shock and began to convulse, after which she succumbed to her injuries and soon passed away. The following day, Minuto's brother called to inform them that Furuta may have died, after which the panic group loaded her body in a drum and filled it with wet concrete. They went on with their lives until Miyano and Aguru were arrested on January 23rd for the gang rape and kidnapping of the 19-year-old from December. Women's underwear was found at the redresses, and they were finally questioned over 2 months later. During their interrogation, Miyano thought that one officer knew about his role in Furuda's murder, thinking that Igura might have been fast. Out of sheer chance, he told the officer where to find her body, which puzzled them since they thought that he might have been talking about another unsolved murder. The police found her body in the concrete drum the next day and identified her by her fingerprints. Several arrests were made immediately afterwards. The court initially kept the identities of the boys a secret because most of them were still minors. But a Japanese magazine called Shuken Banshu found out who the accused were and published them. They said that because of the severity of the crimes that they committed, they did not deserve to have the right of anonymity. All of the accused pleaded guilty to the charges of committing bodily injury that resulted in death instead of murder. This is where the case gets even more heartbreaking. The ringleader Miyano was sentenced to just 17 years in prison. He appealed to the court, but they gave him an additional 3 years instead. The rest of the boys got much lighter sentences, serving only 7 to 8 years because they were below 18 at the time. All of them were released by 2010 and went on to commit more crimes, with Minato even being charged for beating and slashing the throat of another man. Another incident shows that after a guru was released, he was soon arrested again for beating a man for 4 hours because he thought that his girlfriend was involved with him. He allegedly boasted about his role in Furuda's rape, torture, and murder, and even told his victim that he had killed 4 and knew how to get away with it. Furuda's grave was also vandalized numerous times by a guru's mother later on because she believed that her son's life was ruined by her. Yeah, this case is beyond messed up. I know that while researching for this video, I was disturbed for days. It really makes you think about how messed up we have to be as a society to let the convicts of such a ghastly crime off so easily. Because guess what? If you don't give monsters like this the punishment they deserve, it only encourages them to commit more crimes. They learn that their actions have little consequence. Yep, this case really had the worst kind of resolution ever. What makes this case so unimaginably horrible is not just the gruesome treatment Junko went through for 44 agonizing days, but also that she never got the justice she deserved, even over 30 years later. Her rapists, torturers, and killers walk free in Japan today and have carried out more crimes since then. To give you some perspective, people who have been arrested for carrying marijuana have received longer sentences than these actual monsters. While Furuda never got the justice that she deserved, we can only hope that by remembering the names and the faces of her captors and by remembering her bravery, we can play a part in contributing to what she never received at court. Minor Mini Soriano murder case. It was a chilly winter day in 1999 when a 13-year-old girl, Minorless Soriano, aka Minnie, never returned home from school. She used to study in 7th grade, was very smart, and was considered a bit mature for her age. Minnie loved poetry and have a deep fascination with rainbows. After several days of going missing, this flower-like girl was found dead in a dumpster in the Bronx, New York. She was found stuffed in a bag in that garbage dumping bin. Even though the medical examiner dismissed the idea of the occurrence of any sexual assault on Minnie, traces of semen were found on her sweatshirt. It was revealed that the cause of Minnie's death was strangulation. The task force formed by the NYPD in 1999 looked into the case with Detective Michael Legiovane is one of the chief investigating officers of this team. What followed was an intense round of interrogation of the near and far acquaintances of many family members. DNA testing was carried out at great lengths by sending samples from Minnie's clothing, hair, and nails. But guess what? The results did not show any matches. The New York City Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Barbara Sampson, had said the hardest cases that we deal with as medical examiners are those involving children. What was done with her is something that has been haunting me for nearly 20 years. Since, when it's a homicide like this, and when there were no really good leads as to who did, it's the most troubling kind of case for us. When nothing conclusive came out, despite conducting an intensive investigation for a year, the team lost the leads, and the case literally turned cold. However, nearly 2 decades later, the NYPD got the enthusiasm to reopen this case. Under Raymond, one of the first great detectives of New York, they went through a great deal of inquiries, interrogation, and investigation until they came up with the possible theory that Minorless was murdered by someone who was not a stranger, but known to hurt. By resorting to the latest technology, familial DNA, a major breakthrough was attained. Once the result of this DNA test was obtained, the detectives narrowed down the search result to 5 relatives of Martinez's people who could have connections to Minnie's murder. There is one fact about Minnie that we didn't really share with you all before. Did you know that this bubbly little girl had a great interest in astronomy? One of her classmates revealed that Minnie wished to become astronauts when she grew up, but that sadly did not happen. The detectives got a hold of her journals and found out a list of the astronomy websites that she used to follow. And undoubtedly, this showed how great an interest she had in this field. Later, when the DNA test reports were made, the investigating team narrowed down to 3 people, one of them being Martinez, aka Jupiter Joe. The team held him to be a prime suspect. Wondering why? Well, this is because Martinez was found to be on the 19 to 99 list of tenants who dwelled in the building where Minnie used to reside with her family. Thanks to the upgraded technology of DNA testing, the investigating team came up with a vital result. They found out the DNA sample from Martinez matched the semen sample that was found on a Minnie sweatshirt. Martinez, popularly known as Jupiter Joe, was called so because he used to offer improvised astronomical lessons for several children worldwide. Oh, yes. He also had a YouTube channel where he used to upload his astronomy-based videos. This apparently good-natured soul was the one behind the murder of little Minnie. He had brutally killed her by first compressing her neck and then attempting to sexually assault her. But in the course of trying to do that, Minnie died, and the cold-blooded Jupiter Joe, or Martinez, was cold-blooded enough to dump her body in the dumpster in the Bronx. Martinez had thought that he had succeeded in escaping from the clutches of the NYPD. After all, the detectives did not get to catch him for over 22 years. Jupiter Joe, who is now 49 years old, was ultimately arrested by the investigating team. Raymond said that the arrest was indeed a tremendous relief. I hope she's smiling at us. I hope that she sees all the people who cared and that she knows she wasn't forgotten. Minnie will now be happy to see how her murder will rot in prison. Number 4. Emma Jane Walker, a tragic tale. Emma Jane Walker was a 14-year-old high school student, a delightful young lady with a close-knit family and friends who adored her to death. Emma got admission to Knoxville Central High School, Tennessee, just 2 years before her death. Her friends described her as having a bubbly and fun personality. She was the only one in her junior year to get selected for the Central High cheerleading team. She had a bright future and wanted to become a nurse. Amidst her charismatic personality, Emma craved love. Therefore, while cheerleading, she caught the attention of William Riley Gall. William was 2 years older than Emma and was a star football player on his team. At that time, Riley was already dating a girl, but he broke up with her to be with Emma. It was a perfect love story, a popular football player and a cheerleader. They both seemed to be head over heels in love with one another. Emma's friends described Riley as a bit shy but extremely possessive about her. Their love story made Central High's headlines as Emma kept posting on social media about how happy she was with her boyfriend. Emma's parents also described Riley as a very sweet and generous guy who always made their daughter laugh. Despite their approval of Riley, they kept a close check on their daughter's phone to ensure the couple wouldn't cross any limits. Fast forward a few months later, Riley's behavior started changing immensely as he started controlling whatever Emma did. Her parents saw the toxicity in their daughter's relationship and decided to step in and take her phone away. This did not stop Emma from contacting Riley, as he gave her an iPod Touch with which she would text her boyfriend secretly. 2 years had passed, and Emma was 16 years old now. Her relationship with Riley kept getting worse day by day. Riley would text her things like, "You are dead to me," and "I won't ever see your face again," to things like, "I am really sorry. You know that I love you." It was getting harder for the Walkers to see their daughter suffering because of her boyfriend. Riley's mom, Jill Walker, asked Riley to stay away from her daughter to protect her. Finally, in the fall of 2016, Emma broke up with her player boyfriend. Around that time, Riley had graduated from high school and had been a junior at Maryville College, which was only 30 minutes away from Emma's house. This was a deal breaker for Riley as he tried to take his own life by swallowing Vicodin pills in his dorm room. His friends witnessed his behavior and how much he was obsessed with Emma. Meanwhile, Emma's life started getting better. She began spending quality time with her family and friends and realized that she deserved better. Things started getting back to normal for the Walker family, as the breakup proved to be healthy for their daughter. It was a normal Saturday, and Emma was at a house celebrating their victory in the annual football game. Around midnight, Emma started receiving mysterious texts. The text asked her to come outside alone, or they would kill someone she loved deeply. She told her friend Zach about these anonymous messages, and he suspected that it would probably be Riley trying to get back together with Emma. Terrified by the text, Emma and Zach went out and found a man lying face down near a ditch. To their surprise, it was Riley. He told Emma and Zach that he had been kidnapped and did not remember anything as he was unconscious. Nobody believed him and said that he was doing this just to get sympathy from Emma. A day or two had passed when Emma had been home alone and saw a man in a black hoodie standing outside her window. She was terrified and texted Riley out of fear, saying, "I hate you, but I need you right now." He got a text from Riley that he was speeding over to her house to save her. Jill Walker came back to check up on her daughter and found Riley sitting in her front yard. She got furious and asked Riley to leave her property immediately. Emma told her mom the entire situation and asked her to be gentle with Riley, as he was only there to help her. Emma's friends again suspected that the mysterious man who was talking to her was none other than Riley himself. Following the days after this incident, Emma's parents never left her side, as they were scared for their daughter. By Sunday night, everything had returned to normal. November 21st, 2016. It was a normal Monday morning when Jill Walker went to her daughter's room to wake her up for school. To her surprise, her daughter had no pulse. She freaked out and called 911 immediately. The ambulance came and rushed Emma to the nearest hospital, but it was too late. Emma was already dead. The hospital observed that she had been killed due to gunshots. The demise of a 16-year-old girl with a notably bright future made headlines throughout Tennessee. The investigations began as the Walkers and the entire Central High community mourned the loss of Emma Walker. Many condolences came in, including Emma's ex-boyfriend, who started posting her photos on social media, claiming how much he missed her and hoped that she would be in a better place. During the investigation, the police found 2 bullet holes outside Emma's room. The doctors told the police that Emma had been shot twice, with one bullet hitting her ear and killing her instantly, and the second one hitting her pillowcase. The police started interviewing all the suspects, and one name kept coming up: William Riley Gall. Emma's parents and friends testified that Riley had been trying to scare Emma into getting back together with him. Riley's college roommate made a statement that the night before Emma's death, Riley had asked him how to remove fingerprints from a gun. This intrigued the police, and they started investigating the 18-year-old college student further. Riley had shared a secret with his friends that after he got kidnapped, he had taken a gun from his grandfather to protect himself. This heightened suspicions even more. When the police checked the records, it came to light that Riley's grandfather had reported his gun as stolen. There was no room for confusion anymore. Noah and Alex, Riley's best friends, were also helping the police solve Emma's murder. The police asked them to secretly record Riley and try to get him to confess to the murder. They both agreed and asked Riley questions about the homicide. Riley asked his best friends if they would help him get rid of the gun in the Tennessee River, as he could go to jail because of that. At this point, it was all clear that Riley was the one who murdered his ex-girlfriend. The police took him into custody and asked him questions regarding the murder. He kept denying it, but his phone location showed otherwise. It was seen that Riley was outside Emma's house the night she was killed. It was 3 a.m. when Riley was seen going back to Maryville College. The police also found black clothing and shoes in Riley's car, making it clear that he was stalking Emma. The evidence was crystal clear, and 48 hours after Emma was murdered, Riley was in handcuffs. The trial of William Riley Gall began, and it was argued that he was Emma's hero, and it was just a clumsy act to scare Emma into coming back together with him. His intentions were never to kill her. However, this defense did not hold, and the jury eventually reached its final decision. William Riley Gall was charged with first-degree murder, stalking, theft, and possession of a firearm. He received a lifetime prison sentence with a maximum of 52 years before he could even be considered for parole. This has been a tragic case, a depressingly common type of homicide. Such cases are always hard to decipher, whether they are a reality or not. Bonnie Baker murder case. It was June 19, 1998 when Bonnie Baker was last seen alive. She had a vibrant personality and had gone partying with her friends at the Fort restaurant in Morrison to celebrate her pay raise at work. And guess what the most horrifying thing is? Her body was not even discovered until the following year. It was only in 1999 that her body was discovered on Navajo land. But this is not yet the end of the mystery. Sadly, the identification process of the skeletal remains took another 14 years. An unknown woman dialed 911 to inform the police that a woman had been murdered in her apartment on Louisiana Avenue. She even informed the Denver police that the suspect, Cressman Nina Perez, who was Bonnie's boyfriend, was heading towards Mexico with the body of the woman being stored in the trunk of his car. Later on July 1st, 1998, a great breakthrough was achieved. The police got their hands on a red Geoprism car that had crashed near Globe, Arizona. The striking thing is that the car had a resemblance to the description that the caller had supplied the police with. Police visited the site of the car crash and got evidence of blood from the car's trunk. Yes, things do get murkier at this point. Coming to the most horrifying point, it was on July 31st, 1999 when a couple of boys who were enjoying horse rides came across a human skull on Navajo land in New Mexico. Not only the skull, but several other skeletal remains were also found. Exhaustive forensic research and an autopsy failed to identify whose body it was and what was the cause of death. After several years passed on, it was only in 2021 that the Denver Police Department came to know that the DNA samples from the skeletal remains actually belonged to Bonnie Baker. The police, after getting confirmation that these skeletal remains were that of Bonnie, took rapid action to arrest her boyfriend, Nina Perez. The very day when Bonnie was partying with her friends for her pay raise, Perez was fired from his job. Both of them had the same workplace. He was already furious with Bonnie celebrating with her friends. When he had come to the party, he struck out. It was only in 2021 that named Perez was arrested by the Denver Police Department from Mexico. He will now have to go through a series of trials, hearings, and whatnot. Bonnie Baker's soul will now rest in peace, and we are happy that she deserved her share of justice. Murder in the Vatican. Emmanuel Orlandi was born and raised in Vatican City, the Pope's residence and a major tourist destination. She was on her way home from a flute lesson on June 22, 1983 when she vanished. She called home later that evening and spoke with one of her sisters, but her family never heard from her after that. Orlandi was last seen at a bus station in Rome city center before disappearing forever. In July 2019, forensic researchers discovered a strangely empty crypt while searching for Orlando's remains. Since 1983, the Orlandi family has been following leads concerning Emmanuel's disappearance, which has taken them down unusual paths. They petitioned the Vatican in 2019 to gain access to Princess Sophie of Owen Lewis's grave, who died in 1836. In an anonymous letter, a source directed them to the tomb, and they opened 2 burial sites where Orlando's remains were allegedly buried. There was no trace of Orlando or anyone else when the experts opened the tomb. Although no one had been inside the tomb since 1836, it was evident that something unusual had occurred. There were no human skeletons or burial urns to be found. The Vatican had anticipated finding 2 tombs, but not 2 empty tombs. They were absolutely baffled. The Orlandi family has had to deal with a slew of bizarre tips and suspicions regarding Emmanuel's whereabouts. The evidence varies from hearsay to cryptic musings, all of which raise more questions than they answer. Pietro Orlandi has received a plethora of information concerning his sister, and he is prone to following up on any leads he has provided, no matter how bizarre they may appear. The Manuel Orlando's family has heard every explanation about her disappearance. Many of the tips they get come from people who think they saw her in a crowd, but the details seem more like movie plots than real-life scenarios. Regardless of how bizarre some of these leads are, the family investigates them in the hopes of learning more about Orlando's disappearance. In 2008, Sabrina Minardi, who dated mobster Enrico De Pettis, claimed that Orlandi had been kidnapped by American Archbishop Palmer Chinkus, the former president of the Vatican Bank. But it's unclear why he allegedly wanted her off the streets. Marcin Cass died in 2006, and despite his involvement in an Italian banking crisis in the 1980s, no allegations of kidnapping or child endangerment were ever made. The Vatican simply stated that Minardi's claims came from a source whose value is exceedingly doubtful. Some have claimed to have seen Orlando alive over the years. The Orlandi family is still hoping to find her alive after 3 decades of searching, no matter how unlikely it seems. Some of those who claim to have seen Orlando believe they've run into her on the street, with tales coming in from as far as Turkey and England. Others, on the other hand, appeared to be more interested in personal gain. An anonymous phone call was made to a television show about Orlando's disappearance in 2005, alerting the family to a local mobster's tomb. To solve the case, Gosai, who's buried in the crypt of the Basilica of Santa Apollinare, the caller stated, referring to the burial of former mobster Enrico Depis, who died in a gun duel in 1990. The same caller stated that Cardinal Ugo Paletti, Rome's vicar general at the time, ordered Orlandi to be taken off the streets. The tipper, however, did not provide any additional information on Paletti's involvement, nor did he provide any evidence to back up his claim. When forensic experts explored the grave, they discovered not just Petty's remains, but also numerous more bones. The police claimed they'd analyzed the remains to see if any belonged to Orlando at the time, but no findings have been released. Despite all of the hints that have been thrown out to the press since Orlandi's disappearance in the early 1980s, no one has ever been arrested. Anonymous sources have mentioned several Italian mobsters in the news, but none have ever been officially linked to Orlando. Mammoth Elias Slukri's assertions were essential in hindering further investigation into the issue. Bulgaria and Spice and the KGB have also been blamed for the crime, in addition to the Grey Wolves and a nebulous Masonic organization. Roberto Calvi, one of the suspects, was discovered hanging in London just before Orlandi vanished. Everyone, including prominent members of the Vatican, seems to have an opinion about Emanuele Orlandi's disappearance. The Vatican's leading exorcist, Father Gabriel Amorth, believes Orlandi was kidnapped to be shuttled around sex parties and used as a slave. The allegation is debatable, and Amorth has no evidence to back it up, but he is adamant in his conviction. In addition to his theories concerning Orlando's presumed captivity, Amorth is convinced that someone from the Vatican assisted in her abduction and that she has since died. He told the publication Les Tampa this was a sexually motivated crime. Parties were planned with the Vatican gendarmerie serving as the girl's recruiter. Diplomatic staff from a foreign embassy to the Holy See were participating in the network. Emanuela, I feel, became a victim of the circle. Emanuele Orlandi's family has concluded that more than one person is responsible for her abduction. Decades after she went missing, they haven't indicated whether they believe the death was caused by a government or religious organization. But her brother Pietro Orlandi finds it inexplicable that no one has come forward with concrete evidence. I'm incapable of accepting injustices, especially when it involves my sister, especially knowing that there are people who know what transpired throughout the years. Their right to know the truth and their right to be treated fairly are precious rights to me that no one can ever take away. Ricky McCormick's last and only cipher. Ricky McCormick was discovered dead in a cornfield in West Alton, Missouri, on June 30, 1999. 2 pages of handwritten notes in McCormick's front pocket included a complicated cipher that the FBI, the American Cryptogram Association, and countless amateur code breakers have yet to decode. According to a family relative, McCormick was a high school dropout who could not write in code. He couldn't spell a word and could only doodle. Authorities had to use fingerprints to make a definitive ID because McCormick's body had been rotting in the field for several days before being discovered. Even after an autopsy and a toxicology report, the medical examiner struggled to pinpoint a cause of death due to the rate of decomposition. However, detectives classified his death as a homicide after considering the suspicious aspect of where his body was discovered, as the region has previously been used to dump murder victims. The 2 notes discovered in McCormick's pocket had 30 lines of seemingly random letters and numbers on them. Some of the code is enclosed in parentheses, while others are circled. McCormick was an ex-con who worked part-time at a gas station and went back and forth between staying with relatives and living on the streets. He also had heart and lung problems and was receiving disability benefits at the time of his death. He had a slew of offenses on his record, as well as a spell in prison for statutory rape. Even though McCormick did not own a car and public transportation did not serve the region where he was discovered, his body was found 50 miles from his home. According to his ex-girlfriend, McCormick traveled by bus to Florida sometimes, where he allegedly served as a mule for drug dealers, transporting marijuana back to Missouri. McCormick's mental state has been the subject of various reports. McCormick's public attorney claimed he was suffering from some mental sickness or defect while awaiting trial for statutory rape. They had him evaluated by a local psychologist who determined that McCormick was mentally capable of standing trial. McCormick was described as street smart, with an active imagination and a naive, childlike attitude toward the world, while never having been diagnosed with any mental illnesses. McCormick's fiancée reported a few days before his death that he was agitated and apprehensive after returning from a cocaine smuggling job in Florida. In the days leading up to his death, he visited various hospitals for treatment of chest problems and asthma. Some investigators believe he wasn't asking for medical help, but rather a safe place to remain since he feared his life was in danger. The FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit had spent all of its efforts cracking the encryption by 2011. In a 2011 statement, the FBI stated, "Breaking the code could expose the victim's whereabouts before his death and potentially lead to the solution of a homicide." According to some family members, Ricky had been writing in code since he was a child. The notes are said to be real by experts, including the FBI agent in charge of the case. Small characteristics in the handwriting, such as circles around sections of the code, suggest it was a personal document, potentially a to-do list. According to the FBI, the most difficult aspect of this case is that McCormick most likely wanted the notes to be read only by him. Unlike other well-known ciphers, such as the Zodiac Killer, who wish for their codes to be solved at some point. Of course, there's a chance McCormick didn't develop the code. Specialists haven't been able to establish the notes are in his handwriting decisively. It's also possible that the code was developed for him by the drug traffickers for whom he worked, or that he was simply carrying the cipher from when he looked to another without realizing its significance. The FBI has set up a website dedicated to the case, inviting amateur code breakers to participate in the investigation. Ultimately, it is thought that the code contains information that will aid in the capture of McCormick's killers. Gail Barrett, rape and murder case. A 30-year-old woman named Gail Barrett from Battle Creek did not return home after she was last seen at Speed's coffee shop. Battle Creek got shaken to its core by this brutal homicide of the 30-year-old woman. Almost 2 weeks after Gail's disappearance, her body was found by the investigating team. It was on River Road in Emmett Township where the police got their hands on the remains of the lady. And that was exactly when they learned that Mrs. Barrett was raped and then stabbed to death. There was one person who had not lost hope through this entire ordeal of investigations and inquiries. It was Mrs. Barrett's son, James Barrett. He had relentlessly tried to help the police in every way he could. Ultimately, on January 25, 2021, James received the call he had been waiting for several years. He said, "Sergeant Marshall called and informed me that it had just come through from Michigan State Police labs. In fact, some of the early tests ruled Plato out. DNA was still in its infancy, and I have documents that indicated he had been ruled out. However, there were subsequent tests conducted on other pieces of evidence, including blood, that came back inconclusive. The police investigated the family and a couple of Gail Barrett's friends to see if they could provide any leads. Out of the 2 friends of Mrs. Barrett, there was a person called Mr. Roger Plato, who was already killed after being shot by the police during a violent confrontation, which occurred 3 days before the police came across the remains of Mrs. Barrett. Although Plato's body was cremated, the police had collected his blood sample. This very blood sample helped them trace the murder of Mrs. Barrett. The rapist and murderer was none other than Gail Barrett's friend, Roger Plato. The murder of Mrs. Barrett went unsolved for a long span of 30 years. Eventually, the case turned cold, and nothing came out of it. Now, 30 years is a long period, and we can't even imagine how James and his family went through such a tormenting time. The lives of the Barrett family changed forever since that traumatic incident, and all they had been hoping for was to see the murderer brought to justice. Destiny has its way of punishing people for their deeds, and probably that is why Roger Plato died in that confrontation, long before Mrs. Barrett's body was even found. I think it is a relief for most of us and a weight off our shoulders, having an answer. And that, to me, was the biggest thing, said Barrett. He even said, "I think if somebody was around today, now we've got to endure a trial, which then creates a lot of other issues. And then we potentially don't get a conviction. And then what? Even with a DNA match, because so much time has elapsed, Eyewitnesses have either passed away or they can't be relied upon for their statements 32 years later. So I'm kinda glad it wound up the way it is. Stephanie Isaacson. The discovery of Stephanie Isaacson's school books was the first clue that she had been murdered. They were discovered by her father while searching for her at a desert lot a half-mile from her home. His 14-year-old daughter returned home from school on June 1, 1989. When Isaacson called El Dorado High School, he discovered she had not been able to make it to class that day. Stephanie had been bludgeoned in the brush near the residential area of Stewart Avenue in Lynn Lane, where a Las Vegas police dog found her at 11 p.m. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Isaacson went home after the coroner had departed the parking lot and dialed a local radio station, and he told them to play her favorite song, When Beneath My Wings by Bette Midler. The case would remain unsolved for the next 32 years. The case only heated up again in 2020 when local entrepreneur and philanthropist Justin Wu donated $5,000 to the tech-based Othram Lab, who requested that the lab process a cold case from the Metropolitan Police Department to serve the community. The department then began debating which case should be chosen for the test. Dan Long, a cold case investigator, said his associate, Terry Miller, was the one who dug up Stephanie's file first. Miller built a friendship with her family over 3 years and gave updates every 6 months. At first, the lab was unable to match the DNA found in Stephanie's clothes. Nonetheless, Miller pressed on. In January, police sent the remaining 12 tenths of a nanogram of DNA, that is the equivalent of 15 human cells, to the lab. For reference, a normal consumer genetic test on a site like Ancestry.com uses at least 750 nanograms. In July 2021, the department announced a match, breaking the global record for using the least amount of DNA to solve a case in the process. Othram Lab was able to create a DNA profile of the suspect using the limited usable sample. From there on, genealogists created limbs of a family tree. Investigators probed deeper into the case and came up with 2 plausible culprits. They eventually settled on Darren Roy March, who was charged in 1986 with killing a 25-year-old woman. Unfortunately, there will never be a trial. He committed suicide at the age of 29 in 1995. The DNA logged at his suicide was a match for the semen on Stephanie's garment. Stephanie's family was devastated by the news. During a recent phone conversation from his home in South Dakota, her father stated that son of a bitch got me twice. The first time he killed my daughter, and the second time I didn't get a chance to see him in the eyes. March's biography has become hazy over time, and his family has declined to comment. However, some facts have been preserved. When he was 20 years old, he was charged with strangling 25-year-old Nanette Vandenberg in March 1986. Vandenberg was discovered naked in her East Tropicana Avenue apartment's bathtub, and March's fingerprints were discovered near the body. According to his arrest report, Martin was with Vandenberg at the now-defunct Nirvana Place Casino when she was killed. He confessed to detectives that he had left her there and gone to bed. After 2 days of testimony, the lawsuit was dismissed. The fingerprint evidence was deemed insufficient to proceed by the Department of Peace. Since then, police have linked the DNA found in the case to that found in Isaacson's case, and it was a match. According to Clark County District Court documents, Martin was also awaiting punishment for open and gross lewdness when Stephanie died on July 1, 1989. He was charged with 5 counts of open and gross lewdness in January 1989, one for each of the ladies he was accused of publicly exposing himself to. March pleaded guilty to 1 offense in April, and the others were dropped. He was sentenced to a maximum of 1 year of probation on August 29th, and 9 months later, he was released from probation. With the money donated to Othram Lab, Metro hopes to analyze at least 1 more cold case. Investigators are now trying to figure out why Martin killed himself and if he had any other victims. I'd like to think that he committed suicide because of the things he was doing, Long said, but I can't tell you that at this point. Julie Ann Hansen. Julie Ann Hansen was 15 years old when she disappeared on July 7, 1972, in Naperville, Illinois. She sang in the school chorus, was a member of the school band, and taught Sunday school. She took her brother's bicycle one summer evening after school to bike to a baseball game. She was never going to come back. Julie was reported missing to the police after she failed to return home. Officers and community volunteers investigated the area around 80th Street and Knollwood Road and recovered her abandoned bicycle. Julie's body was discovered the next day in a cornfield near Modoff Road and 80th Street. She had been kidnapped, raped, and murdered, and she had 36 wounds on her body from a sharp instrument. Despite their best efforts, investigators were unable to identify a suspect in the case and make an arrest. Major Morris, a convicted killer, was a suspect in the murder, but there was no evidence linking him to the crime scene. Morris assassinated Roberta Bobby Anderson, a 16-year-old girl, on September 1973. Bobby had been thrown on abandoned farmland less than a mile from her home and was discovered with 60 stab wounds. Both killings took place in the early 1970s, and the victims were adults and girls who had been raped, stabbed multiple times, and dumped in rural places. Morris was a kid working as a trash collector at the time of Anderson's murder, and he relocated suspiciously a few days after his body was discovered. Major Morris was free for 23 years before being apprehended in 1992 for the murder of Bobby Anderson when authorities received a blood sample linking him to the crime. Morris then confessed to the rape and murder in a police recording. Morris' involvement came as a great shock to his wife, friends, and family. When asked to describe him, they described him as a gentleman, and police discovered he had no criminal record. Margaret Stern went missing in September 1978 after attempting to hitchhike home from work. Morris was later accused of Stern's murder, and he later admitted to it. Both of his victims' remains were located close to where Hanson's body was discovered in 1972. However, Morris was not Julie and Hanson's assassin. Bruce Everett Lundahl, an American serial killer and rapist, was ruled out as a possibility in 2020. Lundahl was a suspect in a dozen other rapes and killings that occurred in the 1970s and 1980s, including the 1976 murder of a 16-year-old girl in DuPage County. In April 1981, while stabbing a teenage kid to death in his flat, the attacker accidentally stabbed himself in the thigh. Lundahl's injury was fatal, and he succumbed to his injuries immediately. Bruce Everett Lundahl was active around the time of Julie and Hanson's murder and used a similar method to her killer. He raped his victims and repeatedly stabbed them to death. He also lived in Illinois. His DNA was compared to that found at the Hanson crime site in 2020 and determined to be unmatched, ruling him out as the perpetrator. In 2021, a suspect was finally found and charged for Julie's murder. Barry Lee Welley, aged 76, was arrested in Mankato, Minnesota. Hanson was in his late 20s at the time of her murder and lived less than a mile from the victim's family home. The key to cracking the case was genetic genealogy, and Hanson's assassination was never regarded as a cold case. Despite the lack of evidence, cold case investigators never gave up on the case and worked on it for nearly 50 years. With the advancement of DNA technology, investigators were able to get closer to the criminal. A small amount of DNA left behind at the crime scene was used to create a genetic profile of the killer. The profile was then entered into commercial genetic genealogy databases, where a DNA sample from one of Wellpley's relatives had been uploaded. Detectives then put out a family tree that led them to Barry Lee Wellpley. Julie Hanson's family said in a statement, "As you might assume, it has been a long journey for our family. We are forever grateful for all those who have worked on this case throughout the many years." Wellpley was arrested for Hanson's murder and held in a Ramsey County jail on a $10 million bond. He has been extradited to Illinois, where he will stand trial for his crimes. Progress in DNA technology is going on at an amazing speed. With such great development, we can expect hundreds of other serial killers to be caught and brought to justice for their crimes. Here's to hoping that the victims' families finally find peace and closure. She should not be forgotten, and neither should the failure of the legal system. Hubert Alive, the East Dow women. In 1970, at the height of the Cold War, a burnt body of a woman was discovered in a remote part of Norway. She had taken sleeping pills, ingested carbon monoxide, and had been burned alive. According to an autopsy, luggage belonging to the woman was later discovered containing money from several different countries. She was eventually detected traveling around Europe with several fraudulent passports using various aliases. A family trekking in the East Dow Valley near Bergen in western Norway came across the woman's burnt body. She was badly burned in the front and discovered with her hands lifted to her chest in a defensive stance. Personal items such as a watch, an umbrella, some jewelry, and many empty bottles were strewn about the body. Authorities believe the items were unusually positioned around the body, almost as if they were part of a ceremony. Her clothes were composed of synthetic fibers and didn't have any tags on them. Initially, it was assumed that she was in her 30s. She had ingested between 50 and 70 tablets of phenobarbital and had bruises around her neck. She had also inhaled carbon monoxide, suggesting that she had been burned alive. Her death was considered suicide by Norwegian officials due to the lack of identifying documents and the presence of a substantial amount of sleeping tablets in her system. A few days later, a pair of luggage containing fingerprints matching the murdered woman was discovered at a train station in Bergen. Inside were wigs, makeup, clothing, eczema ointment, non-prescription eyeglasses, maps, and small sums of money from Norway, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Belgium. 100 Deutsche Marks were also hidden inside the case's lining. Any identifying information had been removed, cut out, or rubbed off. Even the eczema cream, which usually included the name of the prescribing doctor on the packaging, couldn't provide a clue. The sophisticated dental work of the Istel woman was unheard of in Norway at the time. According to stable isotope research of her teeth, she was born in Nuremberg and grew up on the German-French border. Inside a luggage, the investigation detectives discovered a shopping bag, which they used to trace the woman's movements before she died. She had visited Norway numerous times over the years, staying in various hotels using counterfeit passports and false aliases. According to a 2017 investigation, she claimed to be Claudia Tield from Brussels at one hotel. She was Elizabeth Bean Hofer at another. People who interacted with her were eventually tracked down and interviewed. They all spoke of a stylish woman with black hair and brown eyes who was attractive, pleasant, and only paid in cash. She also wore wigs, spoke numerous languages, including French, Flemish, and English, and seemed tense most of the time. Years later, the Norwegian National Defense released information indicating that the woman may have been traveling around the country observing the testing of the top-secret anti-ship Penguin missile. A fisherman had noticed a woman following the movements of Norwegian army troops. Is there any logic to the spy story? During the Cold War, Norway was a hotspot in the early 1970s. It not only shared a border with the Soviet Union but also assisted the United States and the United Kingdom during Russian nuclear testing and submarine warfare. Russian intelligence assets, as well as personnel from the CIA, MI, and Mossad, were known to be present in the country. After seeing a sketch of the Istel woman in 2005, a man from Bergen came forward. He reported seeing a person matching her description, hiking on a hillside approximately an hour away from Istel 5 days before her body was discovered in 1970. She was dressed inappropriately for the weather and was being pursued by two men who looked southern. According to him, he told the police what he observed, but they dismissed his claim. A section of the lower jaw of the Istel woman was removed and saved before she was buried. Her teeth showed traces of extensive dental surgery, which was unusual for Norway at the time. In 2017, a stable isotope examination of her teeth revealed that she was born in Nuremberg around 1930 and grew up near the French-German border. Her dental work was found to have been done in Central Asia, East Asia, Southern Europe, and South America. The case continues to pique people's interests. In 2018, the BBC World Service and the Norwegian Broadcast Corporation released a podcast called Death in Ice Valley, which delves into the death of the Istel women in great detail. While the stable isotope study provided answers to some questions, such as the woman's age and birth country, many more remain unanswered. Was she a saboteur? If that's the case, who killed her and why? Who was she employed by? What's more, why haven't any friends, family, or loved ones come forward? This is a case that might remain shrouded in mystery forever. The oldest pharaoh carvings were originally discovered back in 1890 and recorded by researchers during that time. The oldest carvings depicting a pharaoh ruling Egypt were made when researchers stumbled across a large rock alongside the Nile River in southern Egypt. Unfortunately, after the expedition in the region had ended, many researchers were unable to locate the rock that the original Egyptologists had recorded, leaving many to question the authenticity of the claim. Fortunately, this stone was rediscovered in 2008 when researchers journeying through southern Egypt noticed a strange carving on a stone depicting the first pharaoh, Nama. ruling over the first evidence of a unified Egypt. The carving is significant for a variety of reasons. It allows us to accurately date the reign of the first Egyptian pharaoh and the depiction of the pharaoh at that time. It also marks the end of the prehistoric era and the beginning of recorded history. Originally, many researchers were aware of the carving's existence through sketch images found at the Nag el-Hamjilab village. However, these sketches were often incomplete and left many researchers wondering if the source of the supposed carvings had ever existed in the first place. The source of the carvings wasn't discovered until the late 1960s when several photographs were taken of the oldest pharaoh carvings. These photographs were never published and faded into obscurity until the early 2000s when researchers uncovered them and tried to locate the carving's exact location. This led to a research team discovering the carving's location in 2008, which allowed for the dating of the carvings, revealing that the image had been created as early as 3200 BC and depicted the first ruler to have unified Upper and Lower Egypt. Presumed to have been destroyed, this discovery has allowed researchers to gain a more cohesive grasp on the timeline of the pharaohs and could even lead to a new understanding of the timeline in the modern day. Plesiosaurus sightings. First appearing in the fossil record as far back as 203 million years ago, the plesiosaur had long been a dinosaur species known for ruling the oceans and having a reign that lasted for a significant amount of time. Unfortunately, for reasons not entirely known, the species faded from existence as fossil records could not be recovered in more recent locations, indicating that the species went extinct over 66 million years ago. However, some cryptid researchers believe it is possible that the creature is still around and might be responsible for a number of cryptid reports in the Canadian province of Quebec's Lake Champlain. This freshwater lake holds over 300 reported sightings of a serpentine-like creature, which many believe could be a distant cousin of the Loch Ness Monster. Shape-shifting wolves. One of the most intriguing legends from India led to full investigations by the police, spanning months. The legend involved shape-shifting wolves believed to have been created by a dark cult in the region. Back in 1983, women reported encounters with mysterious beasts, and some of these women went missing. Police later discovered that they were allegedly being taken by strange wolves in the area. While it initially didn't make sense, as there was no evidence of wolves taking the women, one father reported seeing a creature that looked like a wolf standing on its hind legs. These strange reports led many locals to believe that supernatural worshippers were behind the disappearances. These worshippers were believed to be a cult with the ability to take on the form of wolves through dark sorcery. When the police began to investigate and question locals, they encountered complete silence, as the locals claimed they were too scared to speak out against the group, fearing their powerful magic. After months of being stonewalled, investigators concluded that the disappearances were the result of normal wolves. However, this led to the legend that the group was behind the mysterious disappearances. Maricoxi. The remote, unexplored jungles of South America have long been the source of tales about strange creatures. Among these is the legend of the Maricoxi, a large ape-like creature. Indigenous tribes in the Amazon refer to this creature as the Maricoxi. One of the most famous encounters with the Maricoxi was reported by Colonel Percy Fawcett, a renowned British Army officer, geographer, archaeologist, and explorer. Fawcett made numerous expeditions into the Amazon rainforest during the early 19th century. During his travels, he encountered various strange animals and met isolated native tribes. Some tribes were violent towards outsiders, but Fawcett managed to interact with and live among some of them. During one expedition, he came across a tribe of hairy creatures that resembled Sasquatches. These creatures communicated through grunts, lived in a village-like settlement, and used various tools, including bows and arrows. One day, when Fawcett and his men encountered the Maricoxi tribe, they were nearly attacked, but the soldiers fired their guns into the ground, causing the creatures to flee. While some have speculated that Fawcett may have fabricated this story to gain funding for future expeditions, reports from other tribes and the consistency of sightings of ape-like humans give credibility to his claims. It's possible that the Maricoxi tribe still resides deep in unexplored parts of the Amazon rainforest, waiting to be discovered. Time travel. The idea of time travel has fascinated people for a long time, offering endless possibilities for reliving moments from the past and glimpses into the future. Building a time machine is considered a challenging task that would require extensive research over many decades or even centuries. If achieved, time travel could potentially enable people to experience immortality by traveling to different points in time. The concept of time travel is based on the idea of traveling faster than the speed of light to stop the aging process. By doing so, individuals could travel to the future and observe the advancements made by civilization. Time travel could also unlock the mysteries of past civilizations and potentially offer solutions for immortality. However, building a time machine is not an easy endeavor, and many challenges and scientific barriers must be overcome. Scientists believe that traveling through time would require exceeding the speed of light, which could halt the aging process and allow individuals to explore different eras. Time travel might provide access to future medicines, technology, and knowledge while unraveling the secrets of ancient civilizations. Butterfly migration patterns. Butterflies undergo a remarkable transformation throughout their natural life. Some researchers have suggested that butterfly migration patterns may carry over memories from generation to generation. Many butterflies embark on incredible migrations over vast distances throughout their lives, but not all of them survive the journey. Offspring of butterflies continue these migrations even without knowledge of their starting point, leading to speculation that memories are shared through genetic information transfer. This suggests that butterflies might carry on the behaviors, personalities, and migratory patterns of their parents, almost like a saved checkpoint. The Bermuda Beast. The Bermuda Beast is considered one of the most obscure sea monsters potentially inhabiting the Bermuda Triangle. While the creature has never been directly seen, theories about it have emerged based on reports of colossal phenomena in the area. Some believe the Bermuda Beast is a deep-sea creature that surfaces only within the Bermuda Triangle and is believed to be more than 3 times the size of the Eiffel Tower. Skeptics argue that such a massive creature couldn't exist, as the size would theoretically collapse under its own weight. The largest recorded animal, the blue whale, is believed to be the largest size an animal can grow. However, this theory has been challenged, suggesting that the Bermuda Beast could be a creature like the bloop, which takes on a larger form when surfacing. This practice is common among deep-sea fish, which adapt their forms due to water pressure. Reports of planes disappearing at 3,000 feet have fueled the belief that this creature can jump great distances out of the water, similar to blue whales. Lizzie, the Loch Lochy. Lizzie is a large freshwater cryptid found in Scotland's Loch Lochy. Similar to the Loch Ness Monster, Lizzie is believed to have many of the same characteristics. Sightings of Lizzie date back to 1929 when 2 local game wardens observed a large, unidentified creature splashing in the water. One of the wardens used a telescope to get a closer look and described seeing a large, unidentified creature resting on the lake's surface before submerging. Over the years, other sightings of Lizzie have been reported, describing a creature similar to a long serpent with a long neck and a large body. It's estimated to be over 20 feet in length. While theories about what Lizzie could be range from ancient plesiosaurs to modern-day wildlife, it's challenging to match the descriptions to any known species found in the lake today. Discovery of ancient settlements. In 2018, archaeologists made a significant discovery in the Amazon rainforest. They uncovered 81 archaeological sites in an area that had experienced significant deforestation. These sites featured geometric shapes on the ground, which were believed to be canals built by ancient settlers. Additionally, various ancient tools and artifacts were found at these sites, indicating the presence of small houses, large fortified settlements, plazas, and roads. These settlements were estimated to have been home to millions of people at one point. Researchers believe there may be hundreds or even thousands of similar ancient ruins scattered throughout the Amazon rainforest. Unfortunately, the dense forest makes large-scale exploration challenging. The ongoing deforestation of the Amazon rainforest further increases the chances of discovering additional ancient settlements. Preserving the forest may be the best way to protect these mysteries from being lost forever. The Werewolf of Moorbach. The legend of the Werewolf of Moorbach involves a group of soldiers, including a deserter named Thomas Janus Baptist Chewitz, who encountered a barn near the Rhine River. The barn was believed to be inhabited by witches, and the soldiers, running low on supplies, invaded it, leading to a violent confrontation that resulted in the deaths of the witches and their family. The mother of the family, upon seeing her family's bodies, cursed the soldiers to be transformed into wolves at the sight of a full moon. The soldiers experienced gruesome transformations and became bloodthirsty. Over time, they were hunted down, killed, and buried with a shrine built over their graves. Reports of candles being extinguished at the shrine and the creatures returning have persisted, as well as a military report from a nearby German base in 1988, where soldiers witnessed a large wolf-like creature running on its hind legs and jumping over a 9-foot fence. The legend of the werewolf of Moorbach continues to intrigue and suggests that the creatures may still exist, with reported sightings and encounters supporting the story.